All right, I've got my router table set up. Router table. Hey, everybody. Got to get going on the neck. The key to a good neck build is to make sure you remove everything that doesn't look like a neck. Once you've done that, you got yourself a neck. So that's where we're going. Okay, here is the piece of wood for the neck. I have laid it out a little bit here. This cost, yes, that's right, a whopping $2.50 at Kime Lumber in Charm, Ohio. An Amish lumber store. Place is fantastic. That line is leaving me plenty here to run it through the planer to get the final thickness. I need 3/4 inch for the neck, and then there'll be a 1/4 inch fretboard on it. And you might be looking at this wondering, why don't you just keep it together and just make the neck? Well, if you do that, you have to put a skunk stripe to hide your truss rod, and that works for a one-way truss rod, but I use a two-way truss rod, and a lot of times the two-way truss rods will push a skunk stripe filler strip right out of the back of the neck. So I don't want to do that. So I'm going to have to trim this down to 3/4 so then I can glue on a fretboard. I have set up my little fence jig that I've used before, and I am going to attempt anyway to feed this through, leaving more than what I've marked out. And I hope it works. I won't have to get very far to figure out if it's going to work or not, and then I'll know whether I should continue or just run this through the planer to take off all this. I was just trying to save myself some trips down the planer and have a little thin piece of maple left to do something with after. Starting to dive already toward the line. Now, that line is still leaving me plenty to be able to get rid of later, but that's not a good sign. I think I'm just maybe pushing too hard, which is, the bottom actually looks a little bit better. All right, I'm going to try a little more, see what happens. Well, I think it might actually work. I'm going to keep trying it. It's definitely burning the wood. This maple's hard stuff. Wowzers. It worked. Took a while, but at least I have something usable there. And it's not all in the dust collection bag. Time to take this down to thickness, and then and we can get going on the next thing. All right, that looks pretty good to me. And we are down to just a fuzz over 3/4, which is just fine. Just a fuzz. All right, this is usually how I set up my necks. What I do is just lay my neck out, my neck template out on the board I'm using, so that it is where I want it. I'm putting it off to this side because I've got a little bit of a knot thing going on there, and then I've got this knot thing here. And I'm just going to avoid that. So I sat it on there to kind of avoid that. I marked out where the center line was because I've got that marked on my neck template, both here and on the headstock end. So I mark out how far over the heel is, center line. make a mark, measure that, measure over up here, make a mark, get my center line drawn on my neck piece. Then place the template with my neck on the center line, give myself an outline, and that's ready to go. But before I cut this out, I am going to mark out and route my truss rod channel. Okay, so I've got my marks for my truss rod length. I luckily, oddly enough, I guess it's better to be lucky than good, center line of the cutting bit to the edge. This is a 6-inch base. So we're talking 3 inches from the center to the outside edge. So I need to run along this center line at a 3-inch spacing. Just so happens this mark that I laid out randomly is 3 inches from this edge. So that running along the edge of this board is a perfect fence. So I'll plunge my router into the cut just by looking down at this end, and then I've got a block set up as my stop on the other end so I don't go past, and hopefully we will get a nice straight cut for my truss rod. I was fighting trying to keep it on the wall, so I'm hoping it's more centered than it looks right now. Yeah. Need that to be a little deeper. I have to run it one more time. That's a little better. That should be fine. Yeah. Yep. Much better. On to the bandsaw. So hopefully I haven't completely ruined that blade after resawing that. Oh yeah, that's got some tips that are just gone. Well, hopefully I can get through this since it's only 3/4 of an inch, and then yeah, I'm gonna have to order me a blade. I've got my router table set up. Router table, the template on. It seems like it's going to work. Everything looks good. So I'm just going to take my time and hopefully get a nice looking neck out of this. I think we would probably be better off watching from over here. All right, now that I've got the first pass done, although I've got a couple of spots I'm not thrilled with here. Those will sand out. I'm not sure if I pressed too hard or if the template rocked. There's a couple of spots here where I've got a couple of little divots. Let me see if I can get that. Yeah, take a little bit more of it out. Just any imperfections that are in the first layer here are already there and are going to translate when I take the template off, because I'll let the bearing now run on the part I just routed and then finish the rest of the route without the template on. If I can get the template off, that is. The neck will now be my template of where I've already routed. That should do it. Well, there you have it. Freshly routed neck. Now this turned out well enough after routing that there's really not that much sanding to do. So got to get a little bit done though, a little bit of sanding done. But man, it really did route nicely. So anyhow, I'm gonna do that. Then I think I'm gonna hit the old what's that called? The old fretboard. I gotta get the fretboard done because we can't do any of the shaping of the neck without the truss rod in, fretboard glued on, then we can get on with it. So here we go. Sometimes you got to be careful. These suckers can take a ton of material off real fast, and that's not good. Fantastic. That looks really good. All right, this is going to be my fretboard. So I need to get this planed down to thickness. This side is the actual original planed from Kime Lumber side. This side is when I resawed it. So I'm going to plane this side to get what I want. Now, one more. That is going to look like a pretty nice fretboard, I think. So next, I am going to drill the hole for the end of the truss rod. So I was doing some maths out here. I measured basically the thickness from the bottom of the adjuster to the top of the truss rod. That was 0.432. Then I measured the diameter of that adjustment end, and that was 0.354. So that would be the thickness of this section right here that's sticking above that. Because see, what I need to do, if I want this to be flush with the top of the neck piece that the fretboard goes over. So again, this is going in this way. So if I want this to be pushed down and held in place by the fretboard, then that's going to tell me, if this is flush, how low is my center line here. So taking the difference between that, 78 thousandths, and then adding that to half of the 0.354, which is the radius, that tells me where my center line has to be here, which is 0.255. So 0.255, I actually marked it on the wrong. That would have been disastrous. So I marked it measuring from the bottom or back of the neck. That would have been bad. So then I redid it, measured down. I just used my caliper here. So dialed it in at 255 and then made a little point mark in there. So that's where I got to drill to get this centered where it needs to be with the top edge of the truss rod at flush with the top of the neck. All right, so this is going to be kind of janky, but this is how I do. But the only way I can tell if I'm keeping my drill where I need it is if I'm looking right directly above the drill in the neck, and I can keep a look at where the drill is, and if it's perpendicular, or I should say parallel to, in line with the neck, both, oh boy, this way and this way. So I'm going to keep an little eye on this and hope that this gets me where I need to be. Hopefully the grain, sometimes a drill bit will wander due to the grain. And yeah, I probably should have this locked into a vise of some kind, but that looks about right for what we need for that. If it'll focus, there we go. So that should fit nicely in there. I got a little too much splay. I should have gone one drill bit down. Oh well. So now I got to get this chiseled out so that I can actually even pass that through, because that's wider than the truss rod. So that's got to be chiseled out to get this even to enter down into that area. Okay, so I've brought everything inside because I need to start measuring out my fret locations. A little StuMac sheet here that has my fret locations listed out in millimeters, because I don't know if you know this, but on a regular old yardstick here, the millimeter markings are much finer. You can be much more precise than you can on these big old fat 1/8 inch marks. Not so helpful. So I always use the metric side and always measure in millimeters. So you can call me anti-American if you want, but the metric system is actually a little bit better, if you know what I mean. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. This is my miter box. I use a Japanese pole saw from the HF. That's a Harbor Freight for those that don't know. So yeah, I was in here earlier doing some measuring, and I have some other things I'm going to end up doing. Then the fretboard blank was a little too thick to fit into, or a little too wide to fit into the miter box, so I had to cut a whisker off. And so this whisker is hopefully going to take up some gaps that I have in here to keep the truss rod from sliding around. Of course, I need silicone as well to put in there. So that's going to be a handy little thing to use. And to get the fretboard marked out right, and even to know where to put it exactly and line it up, I got to get center lines drawn on this. I've got to get nut locations marked out on both the neck blank and the, of course, fretboard and cut slots on that for the nut. So all that stuff has to happen. And I was kind of looking back through my numbers here, and I don't have anything written down, and I'm going to have to add some things here. I don't have anything written down about how long is the neck from end of the heel all the way up to the nut slots, or to the nut slot anyway. I don't have that measurement. And so I had to take a look at some of the other guitars that I've built. So I took a look at this one, the old LP Junior Tele, I call it, and measured again from the heel to the nut slot. And then this, one of my favorites, I call it what do I call it? A Gretsch, the old Gretsch Tele. So measured that one, then went over here and took a look at this one, measured that one. It's a little dark in here. And then took a look at that, and then took a look at this one, and that's a little better. That's made of a piece of fireplace mantle. Anyway, took a look at this one, measured that one, and it looks like they're all coming out to about 467-ish, 467-ish millimeters from heel to the fret side of the nut slot. So at least I know that now. Anyway, not that you care, but I had to do some figuring. All right, so right now I am measuring the width of the heel because I feel like the figure on this side is a little better. And with the way the grain's running, I'm probably going to cheat the center line over toward this side. Otherwise, I would just measure half of this and half of this, mark the center line straight down the middle. That's how I normally do it. But because I want to cheat the fretboard this way, to have more of this on the fretboard, I kind of want to see where I am here. 215 thousandths. So half of that would be 108, 1 inch and 108-ish thousandths. And that would be my center from each side, if you follow my maths. So it took half of the heel width and put that in here. So now I know that over here, I've got to be at least that far over, or I'm not going to have enough fretboard at the heel to cover the neck blank. So I'm just going to go out a healthy, I don't know, 1/8 or something past that. Maybe a little more than 1/8. It doesn't really matter what it is. I just need it over far enough. All right, so there is my center line. I will probably translate that down and also across the back. I did end up doing some hand sanding on the back of this to get some of those glazed spots taken off from running it through the planer so many times. And I want my grain to run this way so that the concave is down and that the crown would be up. That way, that does give a little more stability and rigidity to the fretboard, which I should have done to the neck blank, and I didn't. I actually did the opposite on the neck blank, but that's why there's a truss rod in there. All right, so I went ahead and marked out my nut slot marks with my protractor. I'll probably just go ahead and mark all my fret positions first. Then I'll go back and protractor them in. I should be fine. But let me tell you, first neck I ever made, this right here was a nerve-wracking part. Now, I put, just like I teach my physical science and physics students, put your zero, or not your zero, but your 1 centimeter mark on the beginning, because you don't know what's going on with the end of the meter stick. It could be, all wonky and bad and whatnot, and not in the right place. So I'm starting it on the 1 centimeter mark. This says 36.353 millimeters. 36.353 millimeters from the. That means I got to add a centimeter to. Oh boy, you got to make sure. You got to make sure that you're where you need to be. 35. Oh my gosh, 36. 46.353. 46.353. So about there. Okay. Hey, the bifocals aren't too bad, or progressive lenses, whatever they call them these days. All right, time to cut the fret slots. Excellent. All right, so what I've done here I made a mark on the fretboard, which you probably can't see, this way, based on the end of the neck on my other Tele necks. So I knew where it should line up at the back of the neck. Also made a mark up here where the end of the fretboard should be located based on the distance from the nut slot. So I have dry fit, lined it up, center line and center line. This is a 5/64. That'll work. I'll do the same thing down here. That'll work. All right, so I've made a couple little pieces here. Got a little piece in there. Keep the truss rod from sliding this way too far on this end of the truss rod, so it won't slide in too far. And I got a couple little slivers here. One goes on each side to keep the truss rod centered in there. So I have some caulk that is not in good shape. It's about half cured. And I'm going to shove that down in there and hope for the best. Looks like we're done. Let that sit, cook, and we'll come back and once it's dry.